Welcome to the opening plenary session, the Marketization and Transnationalization of Elderly Care Work in Germany, Austria and Switzerland. Discussion on the results from the Decent Care Work project. I'm happy to introduce my colleagues and the speakers in this session. It's Brigitte Aulenbacher, Professor of Sociological Theory and Social Analysis, Institute of Sociology, University of Linz, Austria. Helma Lutz, Professor of Women's and Gender Studies, Faculty of Social Sciences, Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany. Karin Schwiter, Research Group Leader in Economic Geography, University of Zurich, Switzerland. And our project and this conference would not be possible without other colleagues that you already met and will meet in the next 3 days that I would like to introduce to you now. So at the bottom you can see from the left side Veronika Priller, and on the right Michael Leibelfinger from Austrian team. In the middle, Iga Obrowska from the German team. In the middle, next to Brigitte Aulenbacher and Karin Schwiter, you can see Jenny Steiner from Switzerland. And in the upper row, from the left, you see my colleague from the German team, Aranka Benasla, and Anafi Vilalba from Switzerland, next to Helma Lutz. So my first question goes to you, Helma. As the most long-standing researcher in this field, what do you think is the most interesting development of the last years? What makes our common project especially interesting?
Yeah, thank you very much. I started to analyze the work of migrant women by the beginning of the 21st century, when I realized that more and more people in my vicinity employ domestic workers, au pairs, or caretakers from Central Eastern European Europe. This phenomenon was later called the new maids phenomenon. By and by, the area of 24-hour elderly live-in care work became the most important work sector for migrant women, in particular from Eastern Europe. While in the beginning, clients found their workers through informal word of mouth, over the years, advertising became made use of the placement agencies, which we have been doing this project about. They became a significant actor in this new sector. The observation of the emergence of a quickly growing market for me was fascinating and appalling at the same time. Because all this happened below the radar of the state with close to no intervention and control of the emerging business models. This means that I have witnessed the birth of a new labor market, which has become a widely uncontested institution in neoliberal welfare state policies. And this is exactly what we have been doing this research project about. So, this is the situation that we are looking at now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Brigitte, what is specific about live-in care agencies in Austria?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to make 3 points if I have time enough, otherwise 2. First, in 2007, live-in care has been legalized, and personal care, this is the official term, has been recognized professionally by the Home Care Act. This is remarkable because it opened a window of opportunity to reshape informal live-in care work. But in practice, this did not happen. It has been more or less the legalization and, by the way, justification of the given live-in care practice. Nevertheless, the legalization has created such a rapidly growing market like described by Helma. Second point, in Austria, there are two legalized models of live-in care, the employer-employee relation as well as the self-employment. The self-employment in Austria goes along with social insurance, and it is the predominant model. It provides households more flexibility, narrows down their financial and bureaucratic burden. Compared with an employer and employee relation, care workers don't have claim to minimum wage, to paid vacation, to regular working hours, and guaranteed breaks. The self-employment model is the model which is considered to be a forerunner for Europe and also for Germany and Switzerland. And my last point in this first round, live-in care in Austria is a middle-class arrangement with costs of round about 2,500 euro per month. It substitutes intergenerational care in case that relatives are not able anymore or don't want to care for their family members. Often it is advertised to be the best solution as quasi-family care and profiled against residential care in nursing homes. This goes along with the promise of decent care in terms of high professionality, high quality of the care services, as well as control, but also tender, loving care by experienced care workers for the care receivers. And it goes along with the promise to narrow down the burden of the relatives. Apart from reports in the media about exploitation of the care workers, conflicts between agencies and care workers, and so on, the hard work and the working condition at all are rarely given attention. This is remarkable because often multimorbid persons and persons with dementia make use of the living care model, and it is indeed a really hard work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Karin, it's your turn. What can you tell us about the living care agencies in Switzerland?
Thanks, Ewa. I'm happy to jump in here. I think Switzerland is a really exciting or interesting country to compare because it doesn't have the state subsidies that Austria and Germany know. So it's actually when people want to have living care, they have to pay the care out of their pockets. That means it's less widespread. The model is less widespread than it is in Austria and in Germany, and it is also more contested. Furthermore, both models that are predominant in Germany and Austria, the self-employed model and also the posting model, the so-called Entsendemodell, in German are not legal in Switzerland. That means in Switzerland, care workers have to be employees either of agencies or they have to be of Swiss agencies or they have to be employed directly by the households. And so the agencies especially are quite closely monitored by the State Secretariat of Economic Affairs. They need to be registered and they need to submit their contracts before they can actually get into business. So this sounds like a really kind of very legalized, very clear setting. The problem is actually the difference between what is written in the working contract as working hours and what is actually done in the households. So what happens is that a lot of agencies, they put only few hours of work into the contract, say 30 hours a week, and they pay minimum wage for these hours. But then they require basically all the rest of the time they define as presence hours, which is not remunerated or remunerated with very little money. And this allows the households to basically pay a worker for 30 hours of work, but have them present and ready to work in a household basically 24/7. And the reason why this is possible is because Switzerland, as many other countries, has exempted the household as a workplace from labor law. So it's not covered by labor law. And therefore, all the regulations saying, you know, after a certain time of work, you have to have a break and a person has to be relieved by another worker. This does not apply when the work is done in the private household. So it's basically this gap in the coverage of labor law that allows the market to work and that allows to have people be on call in the household, basically around the clock, also in Switzerland.
Thank you very much for this insights into the Swiss model. Helma, how does Germany fit into this picture?
The 24-hour care is in the process of establishing itself here at the third pillar of the care German elderly system, alongside with inpatient and outpatient care. We have in Germany identified about 500 placement agencies which cater to the patients and their families. But the question, how many migrants do work in Germany, is not easy to answer because we only have estimations. Based on the figures from Austria, the number in Germany can be estimated at around between 500 and 600,000. And my impression is that actually nobody really wants to know how many they are, because the question of informality plays an important role. We do not have the Swiss model. We do not have the Austrian model. The situation here is much more complicated. And it is complicated because it is still contested whether this can be a legal form of work at all. And it's not really supported. This is a position that is not really supported by a couple of juridical processes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We move on with our presentation. You all discussed the results of our study in a book titled Good Care Without Good Work. And the book has just come out a few weeks ago. I would like to show you now the book. Yes. That. It was published as an open access publication, and you can download it from the publisher's homepage. That's Enduventa. I am just sending you the link to the book so you can read it. So the next question I would like to pose to Brigitte. What are your findings about the agencies as key actors in live-in care?
Yes, there are 3 points. The brokering agency has a key position because there is an indirect influence on the working conditions by its care provision. Care services, prices, extra conditions like the exchange of care workers, and so on. Furthermore, some brokering agencies feel a high responsibility to act not only as intermediators, but also to give support by information, by some administrative work, and to mediate between care workers, care receivers, and relatives in case of conflicts. Last but not least, some brokering agencies directly influence the working conditions by hiring mandatory taxi services for the travels, by their authorization to administrate the whole part or parts of the procedure, including the social insurance, the payment, and something more. And in each case, this is a very ambivalent position. It can go along with protection for the care workers in case of unacceptable conditions in the households. But it can also go along with the exploitation of the care workers and additional profit for the agency by cutting the honorarium by extra fees and some things more. The second point is that the legalization of live-in care has gone along with its formalization and in parts professionalization. Agencies, for-profit as well as non-profit organizations, and in particular the well-established agencies in the field are driving forces of these professionalization processes. Striving to promote the so-called 24-hour care as an established part of the Austrian welfare mix, they are engaged in quality control, qualification and certification. The three most important non-profit organizations, Caritas, Volkshilfe and Hilfswerk, committed themselves to a common exclusive quality seal by fulfilling minimum standards. And brokering agencies also have been protagonists of the implementation of the official Austrian quality seal ÖQZ 24, where agencies can apply for the seal in a competitive procedure. However, all these initiatives are really contested. Critical voices state that this will not work as long as the public funding and the quality seal are not strongly interrelated. And last point perhaps is interesting, is concerning the pandemic. When the pandemic broke out, the live-in care was considered to be a very fragile arrangement because of the circular migration facing different policies in Austria as well as in the sending countries. And there have been a lot of more or less symbolic activities and policies by the government, by agencies. But one point is interesting. And perhaps the most important thing, the pandemic has influenced the collaboration of brokering agencies, which have come together in a crisis squad of the Chamber of Commerce and support each other, striving to consolidate the live-in care model despite these problems and to profile it as a resilient model. Nevertheless, all interviews emphasize the immense burden of the care workers in the pandemic.
Thank you for this contribution. Karin, your team has been doing an in-depth research with an agency that promises fair care. So what does the term fair care in live-in settings actually mean?
That fits really well with what Brigitte mentioned in her second point. We found that in all three countries, agencies with this formalization, they're trying to consolidate their position on the market. And one strategy to do this is saying, we offer fair care. So there have been in all three countries tendencies to try to set up quality seals or labels. And this is all part of one bigger narrative that the agencies have employed for a long time, where they try to position themselves as we are the good ones, we're the legal ones, and then there is a few black sheep out there, but we're the good ones, you can trust us. The problem with a lot of this fair care discussion is when we had a closer look at what these agencies actually do, we find out it's basically they're complying to the minimal standards that are demanded anyway, that are just, make it basically legal, or at least partly legal, as in Germany, for instance, the legality of the whole model is still under question. And so we had the chance to work with one agency where we felt, okay, there is a kind of a deeper reflection on how could we create a system that is more fair, and that was the Swiss Caritas. It's not the same model as the Caritas employs in Germany or Austria, where they also exist, but it's a specific one. And we had the chance to kind of work with them quite closely for several years, and also have very engaged discussions also with them. You know, what are the possibilities and limits of fair live-in care? And I think there are 2 points I'd like to mention of where they differ from what we usually see in the model. So one thing is that they're very adamant that one person cannot look after another person around the clock. So it needs other carers in this household. So what they do is they sit down with the family and they look at the schedule of when the care worker, the living care worker works, and they define, you know, who takes care of the person on the days or on the afternoons the care worker has their day or their half day off. And they require the family to actually, you know, specify who is going to take care of this. And they're also, and if the family cannot do that, they require the family to have another person come in. So they have a second care worker, a locally living care worker coming in for the other hours. And this system allows the living care worker to actually have their days and their time off, so that their working conditions come closer to a job where you are working or off work. So this is kind of the fairness discussion on the level of the household. And then there is a second level, and that's the international level, where they reflect the question of care drain. So the problematic that we're kind of drawing care workers away from the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, where they're also needed to provide care or do other work. And the level they set up is that they don't recruit workers to come and work in Switzerland permanently, but they kind of borrow them. So the workers are actually home care workers for Caritas in Romania or Slovakia, for instance. And then they come into Switzerland for a few weeks, 6, 8 weeks, maybe 3 months, and then they go back to their previous job. And as they argue, this allows kind of them to stay as care workers in their country of origin, but earn a bit more that they can actually support their families in the sending countries. Furthermore, part of what they earn actually goes back into the Caritas system of the sending countries, so that they can support the further education of care workers in the sending countries themselves. So they have specific projects to do this. So I think what we found is this is like on both levels, on the level of the household and also on the international level. I think they ask very important questions and provide solutions. We also found, so I think it's important to have a closer look at it. And if anyone is interested, and I'm happy to say more in the discussion. However, what we also found is that there are limits even to a fair care model that is very reflective and very conscious about this aspect. So the person is still a live-in person also in this model, and this makes it difficult to actually recover from work if you're still at the workplace, and this is a problem that remains. And the second point is that we're still kind of borrowing workers, even if we're just borrowing them for a few weeks, we're still kind of drawing on the care labor of the sending countries and not from our own country. So these basic problematics cannot be solved even in the fair care system.
Last aspect takes us to Helma again. Helma, your team looked into the situation in sending countries. So what did you find? Unmute, please. Yes.
Yes, you said your team, and actually you were among, you are part of this team. So we looked indeed at the situation of the migrant carers, in particular the living and family situation. More and more, or most, we can say most German placement agencies are collaborating with a partner agency in the sending country. So for Germany, the sending country that is still the most important is Poland. But Romania, Bulgaria, and more the Ukraine are also becoming countries of origin. We have focused on Polish agencies and on Polish care workers. The agencies cater to the German, so the Polish agencies cater to the German ones. They usually do the recruitment process in Poland, and they are also what we found the contact point and troubleshooters for the migrant caregivers in case of problems. The huge majority of the caregivers are women. All carers leave family members behind, be it older parents or children or, of course, partners. A large majority of them have not been trained as a caregiver, but we found a broad range of educational and other trainings. Among some of them have university education. We found technical assistants. We found also formerly self-employed people. And sometimes they get from these agencies, they are given a flash training, but usually they learn the job by doing it. So it's learning by doing. Recently, many caregivers report that there are more and more severely demented patients among their clients, and they are not prepared for that situation by the agencies at all. The separation from their families and the round-the-clock abode in the home of a care receiver is complicated for most of the caregivers. There is close to no control of their working conditions. For instance, the fact that standby for nocturnal support is not compensated by less working hours in daytimes. And many of them are worried, and especially now in the pandemic, what will happen to their loved ones back home in their absence. So the situation, as already Brigitte underlined, has worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic. When the borders were closed, these living carers often became the sole contact person for their clients because family members did not or were not supposed to visit their elderly family member, so either their father or mother in need of care. While at the same time for the carers, the family members in Poland may have also become infected, and they themselves could not leave too. In general, we can say that this group of caregivers has no lobby and very little support from unions or other institutions. In case of troubles, they seek advice from other workers, whom they usually consult through Facebook groups. And about this situation, we will speak in the final panel. Also, the question of the political and the fact that where to look for support is a very important one, and will be the final panel of this conference.
Brigitte, your team focus on how different agencies, public institutions, and NGOs work together to shape the policies that regulate live-in care. What can you tell us about this aspect?
Yes, the situation is nearly the same like described by Helma for Germany. It's a really hard work, and the pandemic has been going along with a lot of difficulties for this sector. Nevertheless, the arrangement is contested from the beginning. And on the one hand, we have to accept Austria is a home care society. People want to stay at home, and the live-in care fills the gap between the family care and the residential care in nursing homes. Alternative modes of caring, like intergenerational housing projects or caring communities, are rare. The Austrian Social Ministry has organized a task force investigating the care sector and proposing reforms of the welfare mix. One measure, maybe not astonishing, is the continuation and improvement of the living care. So living care is a stable political measure in Austria. Nevertheless, the established living care model is contested for different reasons. One reason is the transnational economic gap forcing people to migrate, which allows the Austrian welfare state to promote an arrangement based on an inequality, as described by Helma. Another reason is the doubt concerning the quality of the arrangement, in particular the household as a very difficult workplace, the isolation of the care workers and the receivers, and the exploitation of the care workers in terms of availability around the clock, described already by Karin. So the question is how to better embed living care in the Austrian welfare state concerning the public funding. And in this perspective, the public funding should allow more people to make use of the model, but also enable care receivers to pay an honorarium which recognizes the care workers' performance and services in an adequate manner. That's one position in this contested discussion. Another one is critical voices propose to think about alternatives like community nursing, the Austrian idea of neighborhood called Grätzelpolitik, or they refer to the Netherlands, to the model of Buurtzorg as a kind of neighborhood care. So the idea behind is to allow people to stay more or less at home, maybe not in their own homes, but in the neighborhood, and to provide care in different settings, community nursing networks, assisted living, and so on. And the last point I should mention, because it's really important compared with Switzerland, in the Austrian discussion, the option of the employer-employee relation is very important, especially the organizations of the care workers. The organizations, the NGOs they have founded by themselves are orienting on the employer-employee relation as the alternative to the self-employment model.
Thank you. The next question goes to Karin. In Switzerland, co-workers themselves have been very active in campaigning for better working conditions. Your team has been working closely with two such groups. What can you tell us about their strategies? Please unmute.
This has actually been quite a successful organizing that they have achieved. It's two grassroots groups we could follow, and they operate on different levels. So on an internal level, they share knowledge about regulations in Switzerland, about their rights as workers, about what is a good contract, what has to be in there, what can they demand, and also they share strategies on how can I negotiate with my family. So it's kind of a support network. Also, when someone has troubles, they try to support each other. And I think compared to the Facebook groups we see in many countries, the moment that they actually can meet sometimes and exchange in an actually physical setting, so at least they could before Corona, creates it a stronger support network than just an online exchange groups. And then on a second level, they have been quite successful in making their claims for decent work public. So I think when I compare the public discourse of Germany and Austria to the one in Switzerland, I think we talk a lot more, not about, how can they provide good care, but we talk a lot more about what are the working conditions in these households. And this is one of the successes they achieved, that they, by speaking out publicly, they also got the support of two labor unions that also kind of supported them in raising their voice. They managed to get public attention and problematize the live-in care model and the working conditions in the live-in care model. And then as a third and last strategy, the employment model, so that they actually employees under Swiss law, even though the labor law doesn't cover them, there are stipulations that they can actually go to the court, and they have used strategic lawsuits. So strategic cases where, for instance, they demanded to be paid for the presence hours, where they said, I worked so much more than I was paid, and now I want to have payment for this. And this was also in some cases, it's a very hard strategy, because these lawsuits are very, they last very long, and they need the support of lawyers. But some have been flagship cases that quite reshaped the discussion in Switzerland. My colleague Jenny Steiner is actually the expert on the care worker organizing in Switzerland, and she will be sharing more insights in the Thursday morning in the B panel. So please go and ask her more about that.
Great. Yes, our time is running out, the time we planned for this conversation. So please keep your answers as short as possible. In my final question about future. So with this project, you have gained key insights on the role of agencies in live-in care, and you show that workers are expected to provide good work, but cannot expect good working conditions. Where do you see scope for change?
Who shall
it's
start,
addressed
Ewa?
to all of you. Yes,
I can start.
Yes, great. Thank you.
I would say that all in all, the business model of most placement agencies of 24-hour caregivers is geared first and foremost to the wishes and the needs of the care receivers. But the needs of the caregivers are taken into account far too little. And we have discussed this already. The whole model is situated in Germany, as I said before, in a legal gray zone. So there's no control of working conditions, no control of wages, no control whether the agencies pay social security contributions if they work as so-called posted workers, and too little money for the self-employed. So in fact, if we ask ourselves who are profiting from this situation, then we see that the winners are the agencies. But as we have clearly seen during the last year of the COVID crisis, for the future, it is important to state that the market is not the best place to look for solutions. Above all, it is important to create good alternatives, and Brigitte already talked about this, to 24-hour care. Care allowances must be increased, better caring homes for the elderly must be built, and attractive concepts must be promoted in the area of age-appropriate living arrangements. And this is something that is obviously in Austria already the case, that there is a public debate on this. And to speak about the German welfare state, we can say that Germany invests too little in the care sector. By way of comparison, if we look at Sweden, in Sweden there is a budget for its citizens in need of care that is 3 times as high as ours in Germany. In addition, I would say, lastly, an awareness of the problem must be created with regard to the working conditions and the payment of 24-hour caregivers. Controls are needed that cover both the agencies and the households concerned. And lastly, it is important to make sure that the neoliberal deregulation of the service sector is reversed, which means a process has started and it has been discussed already in Germany and implemented in other sectors like farm work and the meat industry. Transnational workers must have the right for better wages and better working conditions. And I think this is something that is, in particular during this COVID crisis, became very clear that we need this discussion in Germany as well.
Thank you.
I could add 3 short points which would fit well to what Helma has said. At the moment, it's very difficult to calculate the economic effects of the pandemic. And the economic situation in the sending countries may force more people to migrate. Therefore, the problem may be the same in future. The European Union is lacking rules of fair migration, and to prevent the welfare countries from making use of the poorer countries' workforce to bridge the care gaps. And I think we have to discuss about fair mobility on the level of the European Union and not only on the level of the countries, of course, also on the level of the countries. That's one point. The second point is from an Austrian perspective, there is nothing wrong with the ideal of home care or the home care society. Why should people not want to live in their homes or at least in the area where they have spent their active life? But we need the infrastructure, the public infrastructure, which allows people to age in place, and not only aging in place as a concept for the best agers, but for people who want to stay at home in a settled and good infrastructure, combining different kind of services and giving them support in a wide range of the welfare mix. And the last point I want to make is on live-in care in the private household. This is a very fragile and difficult arrangement because of its core element, the live-in. 2 vulnerable groups, multi-morbid seniors and migrant workers, come together as strangers in an established household order of the care receiver and have to organize their common life in intimacy. This works or does not work more or less informally. In our interviews, the statement, if the chemistry is right, is often said, but in the frame of live-in instead of live-out, the improvement of the arrangement is limited. I think we have to think about live-out and a new combination in this arrangement instead of this core element of live-in, which is a very difficult core.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Karin?
I completely agree with what Helma and Brigitte said, and I think I'd like to just add one point. I think this whole arrangement is also facilitated by the regulatory definition we have, by the support in Austria or by the negligence in Germany and also in Switzerland. And I think this is what we can address on a political level. So for instance, in Switzerland, where the private household is still exempt from labor law, this is kind of an omission that allows the system to function, where it can keep one person at work for like days and weeks on end without a break and without time to really recover from work. And this is not the case for all other jobs. So I think for me, this is one important step, right? The household as a workplace has to be accepted as a normal workplace like any other else, with exactly the same protection that we provide with other workplaces. And I think this is one key demand that we have. And I'm quite positive that the whole problematizing of the system and also the activism of the care workers are pushing in that direction, that we actually have to reflect, why should workers in a household not be treated equally as other workers? And I think we should push in that direction to support this debate.